Hey friends, it's me, the Ebony Otaku, the well-rounded nerd. I know, aren't the fox ears the best thing ever? So I'm coming to you with the very rare, um, in between my regular posting schedule video. So this is a real-time video. I know, right? Weird. Because I usually record pretty well in advance because of my work schedule. And it just makes YouTube less stressful. So I'll like bang out all the videos I need like a week and a half for the following month and then not record unless it's a short or something like that. But I thought I would have just a general discussion today. Actually, no, I guess this is going to be more of a versation than a conversation because I'm the one talking, but the comments are there, and that will make it a conversation, meaning you and I with together. And nothing so serious. No tones, no tones. Because I strive to be unproblematic on my YouTube. I mean, I've got my account that I watch YouTube on. I don't watch YouTube on this account. But I'm out being all kinds of troublemaker on the one that I do watch YouTube on. And, just out there having fun in the comments like everybody else. But once in a while, I think it's that people who enjoy art, any kind of creative media, there are things that crop up if you're going to choose to do YouTube that you have to take into consideration. Because, I mean, nobody can please everybody with their content. And no matter how, pure and innocent you try to be, there's always going to be something that, rubs a person the wrong way. And with 8 billion people on the planet, I'm pretty sure the chances of rubbing someone the wrong way are pretty high, whether I intend to or not. But looking at some recent comments that I do read just about every comment. I don't respond to every comment because, again, she strives to not be problematic. But I do read every comment. And a few popped up recently that I thought, you know what? Let's talk about it. Let's have honest discourse because on this channel we are well-rounded nerds, and part of nerddom, part of the nerdverse, and exploring different arts and mediums that we enjoy is also recognizing that not all art is pure. And by not all art being pure, it's because not all artists are pure, whatever the art may be. And the thing I wanted to talk about just in this short video was, is it okay? Is it okay to enjoy the art, the production from a source that may not be pure in your eyes? Because again, everyone has a lens through which they see the world. So we have to respect that. A lens is like glasses, like these glasses here. These are my computer glasses. They're for looking at screens. But for you to see the world exactly the way my eyeballs see it, you would need these glasses. But that's not going to work because these glasses were made for my eyes. My eyes were examined. My eyes were, well, I've never done dilation. That freaks me out. But I had to puff of air in the eye, the little shoo that takes a picture of the back of your eye. I've had all that done to figure out how can I see best. So even if I gave you my glasses, you still would not be able to 100% see the world the way that I do because these were made for these and you don't have these. That's perspective. Everyone has a set of experiences. And even if you and I go through the same thing, because our perspectives are in two separate human bodies, we're automatically going to have a different interpretation of those things. And I just solved all the issues in humanity because we could all just recognize that everyone has a different lens through which they see the world, and that's okay. There's a lot of arguments and disdain for fellow humans that just simply wouldn't happen. Because everyone has a lens, and our lens and our perspective are a culmination of our life experiences. They're a culmination of the things that were taught to us. They're a culmination of the cultures that we were born into. Nobody gets to pick their parents. Nobody gets to pick their socioeconomic status when they're born. No one gets to pick the society in which they were born, which is why when I do things like read from authors that write about settings and points in history that are very different from how I live, we don't judge because that is a moment in time that existed, and it existed within the bubble of how that was created. So I cannot judge it. I can only seek to understand and experience. But let me not ramble. Let me tell you exactly what I'm responding to. So I've had a couple of comments, and I think they're worth exploring. Uh, One of them was on a post I did about the Olympics, because I found the whole Snoop Dogg thing to be hilarious. I had no intentions of watching the Olympics. I haven't watched in a long time. Um, I do practice Taekwondo actively. There was a time in my life I was a very active competitor in Taekwondo. She too old for that now. Now I yell at kids to do better. It's great. But a couple of comments. One was on my personal Facebook page, and one was here. And I don't think they're invalid. One person had commented when I put up one of those Snoop Dogg things on my Facebook that, I think it's hypocritical, that I being the person who posted it, not me, that, they would allow Snoop Dogg to be the mascot of the Olympics when Sha'Carri Richardson was prevented from competing for engaging in some of the same activities. You know which activity. He the poster child for it. And I didn't respond because she has the right to feel that way. Did you know you cannot respond? It's an option. But I also, as someone who teaches people emotional intelligence and studies it, my degree is in the science of communication. So I'm literally an expert communicator, is in recognizing that people have the right to have their perspective, and someone else's perspective does not hurt me. And I thought about it, and I thought, yeah, I can see where that might rub someone the wrong way, because he's never been shy about his partaking of the 420 ever. But I also had this thought, was that he was not a competitor. He is not held to the same standard as those participating, as someone who has been a competitor in a competitive sport, a very competitive sport, where the people doing and the people watching are not held to the same standard. That's why he was allowed to have one set of behaviors that were okay, and she wasn't. Now, is that right or wrong? I don't know. I mean, it's okay to say I don't know if something is right or wrong, that some things are too big for my mind to comprehend, because that's a heavy issue, and that's what philosophers are for. I didn't major in philosophy. I majored in communication. I'll let the theologians of philosophers hash that out. But then I got another comment regarding an Olympic post, where a person whose channel actually I like, and shout out to you, you know who you are, but they had said that, they won't watch the Olympics because they are not a misogynist. Or what was the other one? Not a misogynist, and something about and because they're a Christian. And I never hide my religion. I'm a Christian. And I suppose that was in reference to something I didn't watch, which was the opening ceremony. I understand they did a parody of the Last Supper kind of thing. And then I know some of the controversies that were in the Olympics. We can all agree that breakdancing was. Have you ever watched real breakdancing? Have you? That wasn't it. but other than that, and I can get that. I can get that. But it got me thinking, sports are an expression of art. But even when it comes to arts that are widely accepted, if you start digging into art too far, you might find out that you don't like the artist. I think a more modern example of that, when I say modern, I mean like pop culture, might be the backlash J.K. Rowling is getting in her career right now for things she has said and posted. And yet Harry Potter world still stands. I mean, I still have Harry Potter cosplay in there. Is that okay? Is it okay to like the art even if the artist is questionable? Is it okay to enjoy the Olympics even if they do something that might not jive with my worldview and my philosophies? Is it okay? Is it okay to enjoy things that come out of a part of the world where historically they've done bad things? Is that okay? I think that's a fair question to ask, because all of us have a moral grounding, and we have levels, and some people's level is here, some is here, some is here, of what they can tolerate, accept, engage in. And I wanted to bring up 3 examples just to ponder. I don't have the answer, but just 3 things to ponder. Three moments in time, figures, countries, whatever. And we have to ask ourselves, is it still okay to like the art if we don't agree with the artist? So the first one is Roald Dahl. If you don't know who Roald Dahl is, let me list off some of the things that he wrote. He wrote Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. We all, those of us who are 80s and 90s kids may have known it as a Willy Wonka in the Chocolate Factory because Gene Wilder was it. Matilda, The Big Friendly Giant, the BFG, James and the Giant Peach, The Witches, which a lot of people believe that the Harry Potter stuff was kind of lifted, but there's nothing new under the sun, let's be real. Fantastic Mr. Fox. Other ones that you may know, I'm going through the most popular. Let's see here. I think those are the ones. Oh, The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar. That's another one. So those are very popular stories that he wrote. That a lot of them have been turned into movies, like Matilda, the one with Danny DeVito and that adorable little girl with the bowl cut. I can't remember her name, but yeah, that was one of my favorite movies back in the day. I really loved. Both Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and Willy Wonka. They were different takes on the same story. I can accept that. I love claymation just as a stop motion. I love stop motion animation. So James and the Giant Peach and Fantastic Mr. Fox are like standard in my life. Like I find them to be endearing stories. And these are stories that have lived on. If you've never seen the original The Witches movie, they did a remake, and I want to say, what's her name? Anne Hathaway starred in it, I think, and I love Anne Hathaway too. A lot of people have hate for Anne Hathaway, and I don't know why. She's great. she's adorable. She's got that classic porcelain doll look to her, and it's great. But, you know, the Witches was, you know, about that group of witches that, you know, use kids as their life force, the whole thing. That movie was on HBO when I was like 8. And I thought it was so scary and so great as a kid. Like, it's like total horror bait for children. It's great. You know. But he wrote a lot of stories that have had an impact throughout history. Literary history and pop culture and pop media. And these are stories a lot of us love. But do you know who Roald Dahl was? So here's an excerpt about Roald Dahl from an article the BBC wrote about him. And this is from the perspective of his wife. It was Neil who coined the nickname Roald the Rotten, referring to a mean, dyspeptic streak of which she saw plenty. He cheated on her, and his years-long affair that would eventually end their marriage was with a friend of hers. He could be a thoroughly unpleasant man outside the home, too. Despite his towering success, he was chippy about being a children's author, and he made no attempt to hide his anti-Semitism. In 1983, he announced in his New Statesman that Hitler had his reasons for exterminating 6 million men, women, and children. There's a trait in, this is something Roald Dahl said, there's a trait in the Jewish character that does provoke animosity, he said. I mean, there's always a reason why anti-anything crops up anywhere. Even a stinker like Hitler didn't just pick on them for no reason. And if you read a lot of his books, there's a lot of disturbing imagery. So when people have only seen the movies and not read the books, which, hey, I don't disparage that. I'm a reader. I love to read. I don't read as much as I used to because I read for my job, so my eyeballs be tired. So I love a book on tape. But the books are often way wackier than the movies because they're different methods of telling a story. Books have unlimited amounts of time. Movies don't. That's why they tend to be different. And plus, movies are visual, and then, you know, there's the imagination factor with books. But in his books, he put a lot of disturbing imagery that most of us in Western society would not consider appropriate for children. Oftentimes, he wrote about female characters from the most unflattering of angles. And you could feel his hate for certain groups of people through his writing if you knew what you were looking for. And some of the books are just flat out disgusting if you read them. Like that scene of the boy eating the cake in Matilda. It's already a little icky to watch on screen. Read it. It's worse. 10 times worse. And it's a children's book. So, you know, do we disavow everything Roald Dahl has written and the artwork he's produced that's become beloved symbols of children's pop culture for the past 50 plus years? more than that, actually. He was also somebody who was a fighter pilot in the Great Wall, as they call it, in World War II. He was not a likable man, but I assume that going through war affected him in ways that most of us never have to experience. Does that excuse his behavior? Again, that's left up to the philosophers. But do we reject everything he ever created now that you know that about him? What's your opinion of Fantastic Mr. Fox, Matilda, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and the influence those have had on other literary media? But no, let's take it a step further. Are you a lover of all things Japan? Like so many of us in the West are, because the East and the West are such different cultures. I have been to several East Asian countries, and they tend to be equally enamored by our culture as we are by theirs, because our points of view on how society and the world works are so different, and that makes it endearing. It's there's like this trend of t-shirts and stuff with language printed on them that are in English, but the phrase is nonsensical if you're an English speaker. Or like that what's that song that's out right now with the dance? You know the one I'm talking about. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but it's some rapper woman here in the States and a Japanese artist, or is it a member of BTS? I can't remember, but y'all know the one. It's like a viral TikTok dance right now. A Japanese person reported, well, that's like singing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star over here. It's not even like real words. And I was like, well, yeah, but half the stuff y'all write in English on t-shirts make no sense either. So tit for tat, y'all, tit for tat. So because we find things that are outside of our norm fascinating. I love anime. I think anime and manga are one of my favorite ways to experience a story, because they don't hold back. They just go all the way in. It doesn't matter how ridiculous the story is. They're going all the way in, and I respect it. And as somebody who has to travel for work, and I've got to firsthand experience a lot of cultures, it's interesting to me how we think people are so different, but at our core, we're all so similar. We just want our children to have good lives. We want to eat every day. We want to afford our life. We want to be able to do the things we have to do, but make time for stuff that we want to do. Like, humans are all very similar at our core of what makes humans human. There are beautiful constructs of society that have been created out of Japanese culture, some of the most interesting architecture ever produced, beautiful landscapes, a society structure that is unlike a lot of parts of the world. So it's just it's fascinating. But is it okay to like anime and sushi and the beauty of the kimono and marvel at the culture of the geisha, knowing that World War II happened? If you don't know what they did during World War II, I'm gonna need you to pick up a book. When I was in the Philippines a few years ago, I took a tour of Corregidor Island, which was a island. The Philippines is a chain of islands. It is a bunch of islands. I forget. I feel like it's over 1,000. It's a bunch of islands. Some inhabited, some not. But when the Japanese were pushing through China and Korea and eventually the Philippines, there was a particular island close to the mainland, where Manila is, that they had to keep back the Japanese, and the American and Filipino soldiers fought the Japanese on this island. And you can take a tour of it. There are barracks, there are the underground tunnels. There is like this little thing that you could see out in the water in the distance, where a man had to go down into a hole to shoot a gun that rose up out of the water. Like, it is intense. And believe it, and the tour guide that we had, one of the things that he did was he found dog tags from people who had passed on the island, and he would have them sent back to families. Like, he reported that there was one family that wrote him back and said, finally, after all these years, I know where my brother is. They never knew, because back then they didn't have modern technology. There was no instant access. There was no tracking. There were no tags on people to know where they were or what happened to them. They were just gone, and you never found out. And the fighting on that island was so intense. You know, there was one cave at the very end of the tour that we went into, and he said soldiers and nurses and the rest were stuck down there for months. No fresh air, no sewage, no clean water, just months and months of hard fighting. And there is a part of the tour where there is a separated Japanese cemetery dedicated to their soldiers who died. That was very controversial to build, and I'm doing this from memory after having been there. But it was very controversial because he said that whenever Japanese people take that tour, most of them don't know. Modern Japanese people my age and younger, maybe even Gen Xers too, don't know what their grandparents and great-grandparents did in Japan. And they often have to separate them onto their own car, especially if they get someone who's from like Korea and the Philippines on the same tour. They will not sit with a Japanese person. Not that it's the fault of that person, but to them they represent. And there's like that extra hurt of them not knowing. So if you don't know, the soldiers from Japan, they pillaged, they R-worded women, children. It didn't matter. It was bad. It was bad. And to be fair, many soldiers from many countries, including America, during wartime do terrible things. There's who knew that war could addle someone's brains and they do things. But we're talking about this particular instance. I don't disavow anything that any other country has done. Those things have happened. But what is unique is when it comes to World War II, you have countries like Germany who teach about it, and they did not tear down the concentration camps. They left them standing so that their young people would learn and know this is what happens when you let hate rule. We are not doing this again. And in Japan, it never happened. What war? Oh, you mean that conflict? Shh, what are you talking about? Like, to this day, they've never actually formally apologized for the atrocities of World War II. Because as far as they're concerned, never happened. It's not even a conspiracy. It's just policy. Like, they don't teach about it. Never happened. It just didn't. So you've got 2 or 3 generations now that do not, and it's not their fault. They don't know. Why would you know to go look for something that was never taught to you? So I don't blame them. But if they go to the Philippines and take that tour, they might suffer some residual prejudice and hate because of that. They literally have to put them on a separate buggy and to have those tours because they can't sit with people from countries that suffered under the hands of the Japanese regime. It was bad. I'm just going to have to tell you, go read about it because I don't think I can read about those things here. And YouTube let this video stay up. History, YouTube history. But there was a movie that came out several years ago. And it's on Netflix right now, I believe. It's a little animated movie from Japan called Our Corner of the World. In Our Corner of the World. Highly recommend watching it because it is from the perspective of a couple who get married pre and during World War II Japan, and it offers a very interesting perspective. So in that movie, and again, it's animated. It's a really good story. Our central character is a young lady whose parents are arranging a marriage for her. Just very normal occurrence. She gets married. She has a sister. She's living life. She has to move away from home. You know, just the typical things that happen, except it's against the backdrop of the beginning of World War II. And at the beginning, if you don't know how war affects countries and economies, there is a period at the beginning of war where it's very good for an economy because it produces a whole new sector of jobs, you know, creating munitions and that type of thing, providing for the soldier force and all of that kind of stuff. So there is money to be made and jobs to be had that don't exist outside of wartime. So her husband that she marries is in the army, as are most young men at that time, and I believe he's actually in the Air Force. I forget if it's the Air Force or the Army. I haven't watched this movie in a couple of years, but he, like many others, has to go off to war, and then she's at home, and then has to take care of her parents in law as part of that, and then his sister lives in the home as well and has a daughter, so she has a niece to take care of. Just all just normal family stuff. And then little things start trickling in, like seeing the ships out in the harbor that are taking men off to war, enemy planes flying over, shortages of food but still making do, things like that. And there's a couple of, I guess I won't spoil it, but there's a couple of things that happen in this movie. They're just like, well, no, I'll spoil a little bit. Okay, so spoilers. Go watch it. It's a really, whether I spoil or not, it's a really good movie. Um, when she's out watching her niece, they're just out doing errands, and there's an explosion, and the niece loses her life, but the young lady lives, and of course her sister-in-law is completely distraught about that, because why her daughter not her. You just, it gets real deep real fast. But what it does, it gives you a perspective of the normal people when war happens, because you can't say that every individual is the regime, because there were plenty of just basic citizens trying to live their lives at the same time that horrible things were going on in other parts of the world. And this was one of those isolated stories. I think Grave of the Fireflies is another good example of that. Never watched that movie again. Holy cow. Um, but our two central characters, a young boy and his little sister, trying to survive amidst war. Yes, the regime is out doing what regimes do during times of war, but they were just two starving, abandoned children whose parents were gone and nobody would care for them. And both of them succumbed to starvation. Um, Eventually, the sister first, and then the brother. And it's a hard watch. Um, but it's a reminder that even the perpetrators of war have victims at home. The same thing happened during the Communist Revolution in China. I've talked about that before with some books. They're the propaganda machine of China is unmatched by any country. But there's a couple of really good books by an author called Lisa See, Shanghai Girls and Dreams of Joy, that take place before, during, and after the Communist Revolution in China. And it's about two sisters who are sent to America as wives for strangers because their dad got into a bunch of debt, basically. So basically sold them off to be Chinese wives to a couple of guys. And one sister gets a decent husband, and the other one gets someone who probably was too indigent to ever be married. That's the best way I can say it. But one of the sisters, the one who gets the indigent husband, is pregnant. Nobody knows it upon going because she had a boyfriend back in China that nobody knew about. Um, so the sister with the decent husband takes the baby as her own and raises her, and her name is Joy. And then when the Communist Revolution happens in China, they start calling all Chinese people to come back home who are foreign, because China's a utopia now. These two girls that grew up privileged in Shanghai, who now have to live in America, and they suffer through, the hardships of being in a country that doesn't fully accept you, all that kind of stuff. But then they end up making a life for themselves. The daughter, Joy, ends up wanting to go back, and she runs away back to China, and one of them goes after her. And then we see the Communist Revolution take place through the eyes of this little bitty family of people who were outside of China for a long time, coming back, and one who had never been in China. And then some of the things that happened there, stories of people running out of food and swapping their infants. You can finish that thought. Or putting children in holes that were just deep enough for the child to see out about here. That way, if a passerby saw them and took pity, they'd pick the child up. But if the child didn't make it, then they were already in their grave. Yeah, it's a hard read. But important, because while during the Communist Revolution so many things were happening, you also have to remember the individual citizens, because during that whole thing, I mean, it was a period of the government basically saying, because we're the government, we're smarter than you, so do what we say. And the reason a lot of the famine happened during that time was the stripping of nutrients from the soil. So there was a decision made that, if we can produce X amount of food from a particular, plot of land, why don't we just plant double and triple, then we'll have more. And the farmers who know what they're doing, there's a reason, like I live in a farming area now, even though I'm in denial about it, as I drive home through a cornfield and a cow pasture. After having lived in a major metropolitan city for most of my life. But farmers rotate crops. Last year, the place that's a cornfield was a cotton field, and the year before that, it was a soybean field. They rotate the crops so that each crop is putting nutrients in and taking nutrients out, so the land never gets completely stripped. They're always reinvigorating the land that way, and then you don't overplant the land. And there might be a couple years where they lay the land fallow. That was actually an order to the Israelites from God. I believe, was it in Isaiah? Yeah, they were told by God every seventh year to leave. It was every seventh or 10th year, I believe it was every seventh, to leave the land fallow and not plant anything. That was a representation of tithe. That's a whole thing. But leaving the land to not do anything, that goes way back. But the government, as governments are wont to do, decided they knew better than the people and the farmers and the folks who had been growing food, since time began, and ordered them basically to overplant the land. And they did that for a couple of years, and it actually worked for a couple of years until it didn't. And then there was no food. There was no produce because they stripped all the nutrients out of the land, and it takes a while for that to come back. And rather than try to course correct, they just hid it. And the way that Joy, who had ran away to communist China, got one of her relatives to come visit her, was she sent a picture of her holding up her baby she had, because she'd gotten married while she was there. Idiot girl. To someone she should not have married. Terrible man. But she held up a picture of her and her baby and sent it out, because all mail was being checked if it was going back to America. That like, oh, look how great and happy we are. But really, you're seeing an emaciated person and an emaciated baby. And that's when her mother comes to find her and take her home. Basically. Those are things that happen. I mean, obviously, that's a fictional telling. Those are both fictional tellings, but they're fictional tellings of events that happened. And probably the real events are way worse than the fictional version. But knowing that those things happened and recognizing that I'm a citizen, my country does stuff, doesn't necessarily mean I agree or disagree with it. And honestly, I have no choice in the matter. Government decides to do a thing, it's happening, whether I want it to happen or not. You either get on the train or get left behind. If you've watched Godzilla -1, one of the themes in there was, it was all about giving your all for the state, because the kamikaze pilots, like, it was an honorable thing to give your life in that way. That word I can't say because algorithm. The East looks at that act very differently than the West. To us, it's like the ultimate, oh my goodness, you can't do that. And if it's called for in their point of view, it's totally okay. Especially if giving one's life in service to one's country. And the central character in Godzilla -1 was a kamikaze pilot who didn't kamikaze himself. And he is a great shame to the people around him. And they let him know how much of a shame he is. But it's also a reflection on how undervalued individual life was for a long time in certain parts of the world. That it was all about the whole, the collective, which that's Western society is very individualistic rather than the whole, and Eastern cultures tend to be more about the whole than the individual. But it was a comment on how the individual had been so suppressed that without the individuals, you don't have the whole. You need each person to make up the whole. And over time, people warm and soften. They're like, because this pilot who didn't give his life turns out to be somebody that they need to combat this other great evil, Godzilla, who was coming. And when he tries to kamikaze himself at the end, I guess spoilers, he something happens and he's able to be saved, of course, because plot armor. um, but someone who condemned him before does something to save his life, and they still are able to get the goal accomplished. That's a really interesting turn of perspective. So somebody out there done read some history in Japan and wrote a story that was a commentary on that society I didn't know their artist did, honestly. Because the individual does matter. The whole matters and the individual. It's not either or, it's both. I, as an individual, am part of the whole. However, as Ryan Holliger says, if you don't watch Ryan Holliger's channel, he's great. However, I got to get one of those shirts. He's Irish, so he's got a really cool accent. But, you know, when it comes to the individual or the whole, it's not either or it's both. Because I, as an individual, am part of the whole, and I have decided as a member of society, I want to contribute to my whole in the best way I can. And at the same time, I also want to have a life that I love. Now, when we look at Japanese, Chinese culture, there are many things out of there that the West admires. We love the anime, you know, anime. There, I said it right. We love the manga. We love the to us what appears to be the mystery of how that society works, and it's just so elevated and particular and gorgeous, which is okay. It's called fanning. You know, we're fanning out over Asian culture because it's so different to our own, and things that are different obviously create curiosity. But do we discard all of the artistic beauty, creativity, artists that come out of those nations because of things that we know happened? Do we set aside an entire people because of moments in history that we know happen? I mean, let's be real. During World War II, if a person had dark hair and eyes of a certain shape, they went into a concentration camp in America. That happened. George Takei was in one. And he talks about it vividly as a child, remembering, I got put in a camp in America because they didn't count us as citizens during the war. We did that. That was America that did that. Do we decide that, you know what, I can't like Sailor Moon because the creator of Sailor Moon is Japanese, and the Japanese people during this period in history did things that were unacceptable, so I can't participate. Again, that's the question of the philosophers, because everybody has their own, what do we say, there's levels. You know, there are some things that obviously many people would, most of greater society wouldn't look past, like, you know, discovering that an artist, an individual you may have admired was somebody who hurt kids. To me, that's a full stop. I don't follow people who hurt children or hurt other people in ways that I can't mention, because there's a full stop there. At the same time, the truth of the matter is, if you dig too deep into anyone or any culture that you admire, you're going to find miscreants. You're going to find people, events, situations that do not jive with your personal sensibilities, your personal morals. And each of us has to decide, what is that line? And is that a line worth breaking fellowship over? Is that a line worth causing dissension amongst people over? Because every society produces their good and their bad. Every single society. There's no society out there that is just pure. Where everyone has just, you know, always behaving, where everyone is always doing the right thing and doing what they should and saying the right thing and saying what they should. That doesn't exist. So we have to decide personally, what is the line. But let's talk about one more example. Now, I've made no secret about my own religion. I'm a Christian. I'm a follower of Christ. You'll never catch me talking about politics. I don't do politics. You know, but religion I have no problems talking about, none whatsoever. And I do love to understand the religions of others, because most of us are a product of the societies in which we grew up. You know, if, I as a child were raised in a Muslim household, I would probably be a Muslim. If I as a child were raised in a Buddhist household, I'd probably be Buddhist. But as an adult, I am a Christian, and I'm very fortunate to have had parents that did not force a religious point of view on me. I did go to a Christian school growing up, as the public schools around us weren't very good. And I did receive a very good education from the school that I went to from kindergarten through 8th grade, which is right before high school here in America. And I think some states now 9th grade is considered still junior high, but whatever. In my state at the time it wasn't. It was 9th grade was high school. I was 13 when I started high school. um, but my dad would always have long philosophical conversations with me, long religious conversations with me growing up, especially as I got older and I was exploring things and I had hard questions. He didn't discourage me asking hard questions. We just talked them out. And I made a decision as an adult to explore more about faith and what I believe and why I believe it. And I'm a Christian. That God would offer grace to such flawed, irredeemable creatures such as us is magnificent. Absolutely magnificent. I also have to acknowledge, as someone who will say out loud, I'm a Christian, that many, many atrocities have happened in the name of God. Heck, if you read the Old Testament, there are things that are unconscionable by our modern standards that if you believe the Bible, God did. The flood, like that was everybody. When people ask me what my opinions on certain topics are, they're like, how can you not hold this particular position if you're a Christian? I'm like, have you read the Old Testament? I don't think God feels about certain things the way we think he does. Like, he flooded the whole planet. Like, everybody. Everybody. So I don't think he thinks about that the way you think he does. Like, he once struck somebody dead in the temple for lying about money. like two of them. Ananias and Sapphira. Like, yeah. So there's that. Just a little lightheartedness on heavy subject matter. But I have to acknowledge that the Crusades happened. They did. I have to acknowledge that there are people who use religion, any religion, as a means to control, subjugate, oppress. And I don't think that's okay. I don't think I am better than anyone because of my faith. I'm just a beggar telling another beggar where they found bread. But I have to acknowledge those things that have happened. That in the name of God, so many things happened. Colonialism happened in the name of God. The destroying of the indigenous peoples' societies in North and South America happened in the name of God. It did. It happened. I am the product of American slavery. I would not be here if not for the slave trade. And religion was often used to justify slavery. To point out that in the Bible, certain words like slave and servant are used, so obviously slavery's okay, whether or not that's actually what the text is trying to say. The subjugation of women has been perpetrated through religion. I can only speak from a place of I will not speak of other people's religions, but religion has been used to say, oh, women are lesser than men, so of course we can treat them however we want. Children are basically, property, so of course we can treat them however we want. Whether that's what the text said or not, or if that was what the translation should have said or not, that happens. Do I disavow my entire religion, the art that's been produced for my religion? Because if you want to be in awe of architecture humans have produced, go into a religious place, visit a grand synagogue, the white marble mosque, a beautiful cathedral. Some of the most beautiful architecture humans have ever created has been because of worship and religion. Are those things less beautiful because of the things we know humans have done in the name of religion. I'm going to read you a quote from The Telegraph from William Boyd. Roald Dahl was a horrible man, but if you still want to buy his books, then do. Roald Dahl was a horrible man, but if you still want to buy his books, then do. I think as humans, we have to give one another grace and recognize that other humans are allowed to have different perspectives and points of view, as long as the extent of what one human does and thinks does not invade on the rights and ability to thrive of another. You can think whatever you want and feel however you want without invading somebody else's right to think and believe something different. It's only what we do that has effect on others. And the truth is, as a person thinks, so he is. So if you think a thing too long, you're going to end up doing it. So watch what you're thinking. Because we can't, that's how humans are wired. You think a thing, you do a thing. So don't think about it too long. Get that thought out your head. Think about something else. But barring those things that are just, universally atrocious, and you know what they are, I think we have to recognize that art and artists are also human. I recognize that I'm fallible, that even in this video, I'm taking a risk putting this video up because someone's going to get offended, someone's going to get mad, someone's going to say, how could she say such controversial things? And I'm not even trying to be controversial, because trust me, she was a communications major. She can be controversial, but I'm choosing not to be. But I recognize that as much as I strive to do good and do right, that I can't always do good and do right, even if I have the best intentions. That sometimes I'll say a thing that might hurt somebody, or sometimes I'll do a thing that doesn't get the result that I intended. That sometimes I'll put my emotions and feelings on another person without realizing I've done that. And self-actualization, self-realization, introspection is one of the hardest skills for humans to develop, because we want our woes and troubles to be outside of us. That way we don't have to blame us and change me. It's somebody else who did a thing to me, so I'm this way. And that has validation. Look at me. Your experiences are valid. Your feelings are valid. I also have to recognize that regardless of what's happened to me, that when I reach a place of autonomy and agency, that I can then choose to do differently, think differently, be different. That I don't have to let my past decide who I'm going to be. And I also don't have to let the past of others, the views of others, the culture of others infect my belief and experience that at our core, all humans are after the same thing. That we want to live a prosperous life, take care of our young, get to do some of the silliness that brings us joy. That's what makes us human. And if I can allow myself the grace to be a fallible human who doesn't get it right 100% of the time, I can extend that grace to others. And that two things can be true at once. It can be true that during World War II in Japan and during the Communist Revolution in China, terrible things were perpetrated. It can also be true that there were citizens striving just to eke out a normal life amongst chaos. It can also be true that it is not the fault of a generation they weren't taught about those things. It can be true that that generation is not responsible for the sins of their forefathers. It can be true that an author said and did things that were repugnant, that they held views and espoused them that were offensive. It can also be true that that artist's brain produced works of literature that will probably endure past our own lifetimes and will continue to be made into movies, shows, reproduced because they were important works on their own. It can be true that in the name of religion, people have done things that we shall not mention here, and that we wish had never happened. It can also be true that beauty, camaraderie, love, trust, faith has been produced by religion. Two things can be true at once. It can be true that it's questionable that one person who participated in certain activities got to be the face of the Olympics this year, while someone else was punished as a participant in the Olympics for the same activity. It can be true that maybe they did something in poor taste in the opening ceremony. I didn't see it, so I can't comment on it. But it can also be true that the athletes who came to participate in games representing their countries, that wasn't their choice. That they were just there to compete and try to get a gold, bronze, or silver and wave their country's flag. Two things can be true at one time. And I think that's what we have to recognize when it comes to art, history, literature, all of the modalities and media that we enjoy. That two things can be true at once. That there can be movie producers, actors, writers, and the rest who say and do things that are like, oh. And that they also produce great art. It's up to each of us to decide how much we can participate in. So I guess that answer is not really an answer, but I thought it was a discussion worth bringing, because if I'm going to keep having a channel like this, there's zero chance that I won't stumble into topics, stories, media that are controversial. It's going to happen, whether I mean for it to or not. I just want you as my viewing audience to know that I'm not scared of those things. I choose not to be problematic because I like my channel to be, jovial, because I have fun making videos. But I also recognize that people are allowed to have feelings about things. Whether I feel the same way or not, that doesn't mean I have to disavow your feelings and your response and your reaction to something. And that doesn't mean that over time my reactions may not change and grow towards something, because what I thought about certain things when I was younger is not how I think about them now. There are things I thought a certain way about yesterday that I think differently about today. Honestly, because that's what it is to be human. We're supposed to learn, we're supposed to grow, we're supposed to change. We're supposed to explore, develop, engage. That's what it is to have a human experience. And if I'm allowed to have my experience as a human, I have to respect that everyone else is allowed to have their experience as well. So I can't wait to see the comments at the bottom of this video. I may have done something great. I may have done something stupid. We shall see. But it's okay sometimes to talk about the things that people tend to want to talk about. I have no problem talking about religion. I have no problem talking about perspectives, but I'll never talk about politics. Not in that way, because she just personally hates politics. But I think it's good and healthy for humans to be able to acknowledge that it's okay for humans to make decisions, have perspectives that are different than one's own, because we all are seeing the world through a different lens. Well, friends, as usual, please like, comment, and subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next one.